Opening the center immediately creates dynamic possibilities and claims crucial central space. An immediate challenge to the center, aiming to disrupt white's pawn structure and foster counterplay on the queen side. Gaining central influence and preparing to develop further, this knight jump establishes a versatile presence. Solidifying the center and preparing for a potential Sicilian pawn push to the queenside opens avenues for active piece play. Opening the center immediately challenges black's pawn structure and promises a dynamic game. Opening the central diagonal for the queen offers immediate tactical possibilities, though it surrenders central space. Opening the d-file immediately initiates central contention, offering a dynamic game where piece activity will decide matters. Developing the knight here aggressively challenges white's central pawn and readies black for castling. Unleashing central pressure, this knight boldly claims its stake, preparing to influence a wide swath of the board. Developing the knight to its natural square solidifies black's central influence and prepares for future pawn advances. Developing the bishop to an active square, this piece eyes black's kingside and prepares castling. Solidifying the center pawns creates a balanced pawn structure, preparing for future pawn breaks. Preserving the bishop's diagonal now, preparing for potential queenside expansion. Preparing a queenside expansion and controlling the b5 square, this move aims to create a more dynamic position. Retreating the bishop clears the e3 square for potential pawn advances and prepares for the king's safety. Knight embarks on a journey, aiming to disrupt white's bishop's influence and open lines for attack. Aggressively expanding the kingside pawn chain, white aims to seize central space and potentially open lines for attack. Breaking the symmetry, black opens the b-file for a potential rook, but also weakens the queenside dark squares. Opening the file now creates an immediate attacking channel for your rook. Unleashing central dynamism, black immediately challenges white's d4 pawn, aiming to disrupt its pawn chain and fight for space. Reclaiming central presence becomes paramount, reinforcing the pawn chain while preparing for further pawn advances. Black opens a diagonal for the bishop and clears the d-file, but potentially weakens the kingside pawn structure. Opening the bishop diagonal to control central squares and prepare for pawn advances. Developing the bishop efficiently opens up diagonals and prepares castling, a crucial step toward king safety in this open position. The queen now actively patrols the d-file, ready to pounce on any misplaced pieces. Securing the king's safety is paramount, especially with white's queenside pawn structure compromised. Castling queenside unleashes attacking potential on the kingside, but it does leave white's monarch somewhat exposed. Initiating a pawn storm on the queenside aims to disrupt white's kingside castle and create attacking possibilities. Unleashing a tempo-gaining tactic, white boldly sacrifices material to disrupt black's pawn structure and expose the king. Centralizing the queen here grabs the pawn, but opens lines for white's attack. Swapping queens here clarifies the structure, paving the way for a dynamic queenside play. Trading the queen immediately clarifies the central pawn structure, aiming for a more balanced endgame. Initiating a rook invasion on the 6th rank, aiming to exploit the open file and potentially pressure black's isolated pawns. Initiating development for the bishop, eyeing the newly opened diagonal and preparing for central engagement. A bold repositioning, aiming to dominate the b-file while creating immediate threats against the black queenside. Reclaiming the pawn on b3 immediately addresses the queenside pressure. Opening the d-file now solidifies control, preparing to pressure black's queenside pawn structure and exploit its weaknesses. Reclaiming the central file is crucial, but remember to support that rook with another piece. Reinforcing the rook on the d-file solidifies white's central pressure, preparing for a potential advance or tactical play. Reclaiming the d-file now allows black to potentially disrupt white's rook coordination and activate their own pieces. Trading rooks simplifies the position, potentially leading to a clearer endgame where black's bishop pair will be a crucial factor. Recapturing the piece opens up the f-file, potentially leading to increased pressure on white's king. Solidifying the queenside pawn structure, white aims to restrict black's rook mobility and create a stable base for future operations. The rook's repositioning aims to contest the open d-file and offer support for potential pawn advances, a prudent step in this dynamic position. The knight's advance to e5 creates a tactical nexus, eyeing weaknesses around black's king and aiming to disrupt their pawn structure. Focusing on king safety, the black monarch now endeavors to escape the open d-file and seek shelter. Securing the king is paramount here, preparing a smoother transition into the middle game by reinforcing the monarch. Consolidating the king's safety allows the rooks to potentially coordinate for pressure on the d-file. Bringing the king towards the center, seeking active participation in the evolving endgame landscape. Fortifying the kingside is paramount, as white's rook prepares to dominate the central files. Repositioning the rook to the second rank aims to prepare for potential advances along the d-file, eyeing the weakened pawn structure around black's king. Clearing the c-file now allows this rook to actively contest control, a crucial shift towards endgame potential. Initiating a kingside pawn storm might offer dynamism, but it also weakens your own monarch's protection, creating potential counterplay. Knight rerouting towards the center opens up lines for the rooks, aiming to exploit white's isolated pawns. Unleashing pawns to disrupt black's rook's mobility and claim central space. Reactivating the knight aims to challenge white's central pawn majority and potentially exploit the open d-file. Pushing this pawn forward to initiate a decisive pawn storm, aiming to cramp black's cramped position and potentially create a passed pawn. An opportunistic fork, this knight's charge simultaneously threatens the king and the central pawn, disrupting white's coordination. Pivoting the knight to a central outpost neutralizes the passed pawn's threat and sets up a counterattack on the queen side. Unleashing the rook after the exchange offers a dynamic counterplay, eyeing white's vulnerable pawns on the queen side. Activating the rook on the d-file aims to disrupt black's pawn structure and create attacking chances. Seeking refuge for the weakened king, black retreats the rook, preparing for a defensive standoff. Opening the e-file dramatically accelerates white's initiative, threatening to penetrate black's weakened queenside structure. Shifting the rook to the kingside offers better attacking prospects against white's exposed monarch. Focusing the rook's power to the f-file now threatens a decisive knight fork. Activating the rook on the open file is crucial for controlling the center and potentially launching an attack. Unleashing a pawn storm to crack open the king's defenses and create mating threats. Unlocking the bishop's potential here, targeting the d4 outpost and creating dynamism in the center. Initiating a dangerous kingside pawn storm, this advance aims to rip open black's monarch by creating unstoppable threats. Sensing an opportunity, black redirects the bishop to a more active square, aiming to disrupt white's central control and potentially activate the rook. Securing the king's escape route while preparing to activate the rook along the central files. Seizing the open file now, this check forces white's king to a precarious square, potentially opening lines for a swift attack. Securing the king on the king's flank offers a vital defensive anchor amidst the looming pawn storm. Doubling rooks on the open file offers immense pressure, aiming to force pawn weaknesses. Prioritizing piece activity, white repositions the knight to a more central square, preparing for potential advances. Unlocking the d-file with this bishop is a bold attempt to disrupt white's pawn structure. Repositioning the king to a safer square, while eyeing potential pawn breakthroughs. Unleashing the rook's power along the open d-file forces the white king to retreat and highlights the precariousness of white's position. Shifting the knight to d4 aims to block the rook's influence and potentially contest the d-file. The rook now establishes a crucial outpost, threatening to infiltrate white's position and harass the kingside. The king ventures out, aiming to activate itself and find better squares, perhaps to support a pawn push or connect rooks. This piece reroutes, seeking active diagonals and creating tactical opportunities for white's king. Reclaiming central space, with the king will force black's pieces into defensive postures. Retreating the rook now concedes the initiative, allowing white's king to advance further and exert pressure. Solidifying the pawn chain offers stability, but neglecting piece activity grants black counterplay on the open files. Gaining control of the open c-file now is paramount for black's endgame prospects. Unleashing the king's potential to occupy central space before the likely pawn breakthrough offers a dynamic attacking platform. Steering the bishop to a safer outpost on f7 aims to consolidate the pawn structure. Controlling the critical king's file opens attacking possibilities for white. Aimed repositioning for better knight access, threatening disruption of the enemy pawn wall. Pushing the pawn offers a potential breakthrough to dislodge the bishop and exploit the open kingside. Opening the king's structure like this invites immediate tactical complications and king safety issues. Unleashing a rook along the open file, white aims to exploit the exposed black monarch and create immediate mating threats. The rook on g8 now aims to penetrate the weakened queenside pawn structure, activating the king to centralize and participate in the fight for critical squares. The bishop's retreat to g6 aims to secure the passed pawn on h6 and potentially redeploy for defense. This repositioning aims to initiate a kingside assault, leveraging the exposed black monarch after the pawn sacrifice. Seeking to disrupt the enemy structure and exploit any lingering king safety issues. Unleashing the king into the endgame is a bold, if somewhat precarious, choice. The rook's foray to the queenside aims to disrupt white's king safety, probing for weaknesses before the impending material exchange. Relocating the rook to the open first rank seizes a vital pathway for potential pawn advances or piece infiltration. Preparing to contest the open files is paramount for black now, aiming to mobilize the rook. The rook's repositioning to the open file signals a patient tightening of white's grip. Re-establishing piece coordination is paramount, aiming to prevent white's rook from invading the back rank. Redirecting the rook to the d-file aims to consolidate white's material advantage and prepare for a decisive endgame transition by clearing lines for the king. Repositioning the bishop to h5 seeks to activate it and potentially pressure white's kingside pawn structure. King hunt commences as the knight leaps into a checking position, forcing the opponent's monarch to seek refuge. Seeking a safe haven for the monarch, this king endeavors to escape the central crossfire. Opening the d-file with the rook now directly targets the vulnerable black king.